Hey, all. Welcome. I am Chris Coffin. I'm from the MITRE Corporation. I had another talk earlier, but I'll explain it again. I've been with MITRE since 2012, and most of that time I've spent on the CVE program, but various other things. I'm also a CVE board member and also co-chair of the CVE Quality Working Group. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the CVE record format, so this is where we're going to cover some of that. Current efforts, though, I really do. Most of my time now is spent driving the CVE record format on the Quality Working Group, and that's what I really want to focus on. And yeah, that's me. And I'm also joined by MZ.
Hello. Forgive me for sitting. I rolled my ankle earlier this week, and standing kind of sucks. I'm also a co-chair of the Quality Working Group and a CVE board member. I'm a by day principal security engineer for F5, but we're here to talk about CVE records.
Excuse us for our handoffs too. We didn't pre-plan. So overview of what we want to cover. So we've got, obviously we want to cover what is the record format for those of you that might not be familiar. What have we recently released as far as features and updates? What we've already put into our GitHub repo, which we'll touch on in a little bit. What we're working on currently, some of the things that might be on the horizon for the format. And then I did throw something in about identifying properties for removal, which is a hot topic that we haven't discussed a whole lot yet, but we're getting there. So and if we have time for questions, we'll do that. So what is the CVE record format for those that need an update? It is the blueprint. It is the JSON schema that we use for ingesting records as well as displaying records. So when CNAs submit CVE records to the CVE program, those go through the JSON format, and it helps define what should be in those records and what the requirements are. So I know some of you might have been in some other talks and have heard about this. We'll talk a little more about that. Current version of the format is 5.1.1. Oh, you have a mic too?
Yep, I believe so. Is this working? Yep, there we go. Yeah, so 5.1.1 today, we're working on, I think what's going to be 5.1.2. Talk about that.
Yep. So taking a step back, why should you care about the CVE record format? It does, like I said, determine what data is provided by CNAs. Think affected products and versions, think CVSS, CPE, all that stuff, and future formats as well. It also determines what the minimum requirements are for submissions, and that is a hot topic.
Yeah, there was some conversations earlier this week, some presentations earlier this week on that topic. The minimum requirements are pretty much the minimum requirements. Why not? Are you coming through the speakers?
Just have to talk closer.
I have to hold it really close to my mouth. Okay. Different mics, different sessions. Yeah, what was I saying? The minimum requirements are very much the minimum requirements right now, and there are certainly some ongoing debates about what should be additionally required, if anything, and all that kind of thing. Because right now it's pretty minimal to have a record.
Yeah, if any of you caught Andrew Pollock's talk, I told him I was going to call him out, on comparing CVE and OSV. I've had multiple conversations with Andrew in the past and also yesterday before and after his talk. I'm very open to his feedback as well as anyone in this room that wants to provide feedback. We are all about communicating and helping drive things forward, and we want to do that as fast as possible. There's a big focus now. At least until recently, we spent a lot of time working with CNAs, trying to help them define better data. I think what we really need to do instead, and what we want to do going forward, is focus on the consumers. And there are some efforts to do that already in place, but I think where we will start is with, I think we're talking about standing up a consumer working group. So anyone in this room that is a consumer of CVE data, we want your feedback. If you are available to participate in a working group, we'd love to hear that as well, because that's something we're thinking about standing up.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah. As a board member, I brought it up, but I very much strongly believe we have a lot of input from the supply side right now. There's a lot of input from the CNAs, but it's just kind of like we publish things and expect consumers to just consume. I do think we really need to get more feedback, organized feedback from the consumer side so that it helps shape the program, because we need to serve both our consuming audience and the supply audience. I think it's been a little imbalanced, my view.
That's right. Okay, so a little bit about what we've done in the recent past. May of 2024, we implemented the 5.1.0 version of the CVE record format. The big change with that was adding CVSS4. So I don't have stats on how many people are using it yet, but I know it was.
We are.
Yeah.
I know like Microsoft, Red Hat, that's some others who are using it. So a lot of the big CNAs have started to use CVSS4. There was some pent up demand. And also, I think the other thing that was really done in there, what's up in a slide, is
the name change.
Tightening up some of the validations and things that we did.
We also did the name change.
Oh, the name change, yes.
Yeah. So it was JSON, CVE JSON 5, I think we're referring to it as, and we moved to the CVE record format. And yeah, there was some various tightening up of different parts of the schema for, I think we're still, there's a new one that actually we'll cover in just a second. CVE record format 5.1.1 was released in December of last year. And the big addition with that was the ability to add CPE data in a more robust way. I know it's not represented on the slide. We did allow CPE prior to that, but it wasn't very usable. You want to talk about your experiences with that?
Yeah, sure. I was one of the agitators for this change. Previous versions of CVSS record format, you want to say schema, but CVS record format allowed for CPE, but it was basically just an array. There's like a CPE array, and you could put arrays of values in. But there was nothing to indicate what those values actually meant. And what we were seeing was there were a few different CNAs using that array, but some were putting in their fixed CPEs, others were putting in the vulnerable CPEs, and which basically meant the data downstream was useless because you had no idea of knowing when you were consuming it. Okay, here's a CPE in a vacuum, just floating around. It's a CPE. What does this map to? Affected, whatever. So we went through a lot of discussion and basically came back around to eventually adopting the same format with small naming changes that NVD has been using for a long time, the applicability statement, that format. Partially, there were several different proposals that were floated about doing this, but that one won out partially because of weight there was already a lot of use of that format out there. Compatibility, where if somebody wanted to bring their data across that was already in the record from NVD, you could just port it across. There's lots of advantages to it. But it provided all the flexibility you needed for defining a CPE and ranges and things in exactly the same way NVD records have been doing it. So now we've seen like Microsoft, Red Hat, and I think some others now, but I know Microsoft was kind of our flagship adopter of that.
Yep.
We worked with Lisa Olson over there. There were a few false starts. Like all learning processes, we were definitely documentation that goes with that. There's now documentation for using those fields. A lot of that was done with experience of working a kind of feedback loops with Lisa on getting that nailed down. Red Hat started using it. As putting on my CNA hat, F5 is working on doing that. I need to get some tooling finalized to start publishing those, but it's very usable now.
That's right. Yeah, and for those, he mentioned some documentation. There is a using CPE and CVE Quick Start Guide on the cve.org resources page. And I can give you guys a link to that. I think, I'm not sure if I included it in the slide deck, but I'll make sure. So outside of CPE, the other things that we added was just a simple miscellaneous update. I think I modified our example CVE records. I don't know if we've documented this well, but it's pretty common for folks to use CVEs with examples in the wild, and we'd really like to push folks to use a namespace that isn't real.
Clash with a real namespace.
Yeah. So starting to use the CVE 1900.
Unless you have like a buggy whip problem, you don't really need 1900.
Yep. So minor change. So we mentioned CPE applicability statements in 5.1.1. It is essentially a copy, I shouldn't say copy, but mirror of what the NVD vulnerability details does for configurations. There is a name change at the top. We call it CP applicability instead of configurations. But essentially what that means is you could take your data from the NVD vulnerability details and copy the JSON into the CVE record. We don't require the match criteria ID because that is assigned by NIST.
But we don't require it, but it's allowed.
It's allowed.
If you want to do a one-for-one copy from NVD, like you're a CNA and you're like, I'll bring all those CPUs over and save my time. You can do a one-to-one map and bring it over. But whereas they require it, but that ID is something they generate for their needs. So CNA can't self-generate that. So we don't require it.
That's right. So this record, oh yeah, this is working. This record is essentially just a very basic example, one CPE identifier with the version specified, vulnerable true, and then you can compare that side by side with what is currently required in the affected array with the same product, same version affected. So that gives you an example or an idea of how they compare. Very basic example though. Okay, so moving on to what we will be releasing or what we will be including in the next release. So again, we've got some more tightening of the schema, specifically around the affected array. We put in to disallow additional properties there, as well as sometimes we do get mistyped property names in the affected array. So we're cleaning that up. There's some more additional details for some of the example records in the repo and some documentation updates. These are all things that we've got in our develop branch that are ready to go. Mostly just basic stuff. Did you have anything you want on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of criticism about quality, data quality in CVE program. Not going to argue that because there was absolutely problems with data quality in CVE program. And so we're trying to tighten some things up, better validation. Some of it's learning from experience, seeing what goes in, people are uploading. Sometimes you think, all the standard with the spec was clear, and then you see the real world. It's like, okay, I guess it wasn't because people are doing things we didn't expect them to do. So there's some tightening up of validation. And then I know there's a slide we have on this about our GitHub repository, which is how this all works, is pull requests for all these changes. There are a bunch of things in there people have identified and open pull requests for, and people are welcome to do that, which we'll mention of if you spot problems that need to be resolved and there isn't actually a ticket type thing for that to say, hey, here's an issue, you can create one. We're probably not going to tackle every validation problem in 5.1.2, but we've been phasing those in over time. And it depends also on how big of a change it is. Is it going to break a lot of records that exist in the corpus today? Those are harder changes to do. If it's like, oh, there's a dozen records it's going to affect, we can reach out to the CNA and ask them to fix things. That's a lot easier to get done. So we totally recognize and acknowledge there are improvements we need to make and tighten up our data quality, and we're working in that direction, just kind of at a steady pace.
That's right. Yep. So like you said, like MZ said, the numbers are in this case either an issue number or a PR number, depending on.
Yeah, those pretty much all like GitHub pull request numbers if you want to go look those up.
Yep. So one of the big things we're working on for the next release, and this should go into the next release as long as we can herd all the cats in the QWG, is SemVer 2.0. So there was an overarching issue for this that was around tightening up our version types. So we have a number of version types when you're defining affected products and versions. And funny enough, none of those do any validation on the data that's provided. So if it says SemVer, we don't check to make sure that that is actually SemVer when it's entered into the record. So we're looking to change that with a new version type called SemVer 2.0. And we do have actually a pull request in right now to do new properties for this, as well as validate that it actually is SemVer 2.0 with the actual SemVer provided
the
regex.
validation that SemVer standard calls for. That if you say it's SemVer 2.0, it will be rejected unless it validates that it is SemVer 2.0.
Yep. And going back to Andrew's talk about cleaning up data, being able to better automate that, I think this is a step in that direction, because what we'd be doing essentially is giving CNAs the ability to specify actual SEMFR versions and making sure that it's correct. I think there's still work to do on obviously vendor and product data that's provided to us, but I have heard some stuff about Perl validation of package names and some tools to help with that. And there's a possibility we could integrate that either into the schema, or we also could do it programmatically through the CVE services.
Yeah, we work closely with the other working groups like the AWG, which is Automation Working Group. They're the ones that handle CVE services. So there are some things that are done that you can't necessarily do in a schema, but you can do programmatically in code. That so when something gets submitted to the API, there's some additional steps that can be done there. So sometimes we're like, there's no good way for us to handle that, but it's still a good idea. Let's talk to AWG. And some of us are in all the working groups, so we just kind of bounce around.
And everything flows together. But there's a couple of things we're wrestling with right now. So any input from the community is great, and we want more participation on the QWG. I know we're talking right now about we've got a set of property names that we use for describing versions and version ranges. There's a proposal for this which uses slightly different names, and we're not sure if we want to change that up on folks. But we're also interested to hear if there's better ways of doing it. This is another thing I talked to Andrew about. Go ahead. Do you have a mic?
One way to do it better would probably change to verse in the version range specifier. It's something that was developed in the Perl community. It's currently being added to become an EMCA standard. And basically, it covers a lot of problems that you currently have. It covers the version types. Since you can have different versioning schemes, it's not only SEMVer, it's not only the other things that we have, NPM, PyPy, all of them work a little bit different.
Something that needs to support everything, and that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, basically, the nice thing about verse is you have a generic scheme, how it works, and then you can add on your version schemes. And that can be added dynamically, so you don't have actually to change the JSON schema every time there's a new version scheme added. You just have to update your services, and the new schema is accepted.
That's awesome. Well, in the interest of time, let's talk after the session and figure out how we can start that conversation.
Yeah, I think that has come up because there is, so this slide or the next slide, they were talking about Perl at some point is in our slides.
Yeah, we can move on. What's on the horizon?
Yeah. So one of the things we're looking at, right now, obviously we talked CPE was added last year. What we've said, we're not, the CVE program's responsibility isn't really to force the global adoption of any one software identifier. And I was on a panel earlier this week about software identifiers, and there's some other discussions happening here. There is no universally accepted software identifier right now. Like you'll find people who passionately hate Perl and passionately hate CPE and Omnivore, and basically there's people who are very religiously divided.
Extremes.
Yeah. What we're trying to do is enable, if what you're using, let's allow you to do that in your record. So if you're like Perl's mostly, it's not. There's a misconception that Perl was like the open source identifier. It isn't, but it's very widely adopted in open source compared to other systems. So we're looking at allowing Perl, let's say we use CPE, as a software identifier in the CVE record. And that's something we're probably in the next version of the schema or record format. Just depends. That again, there's debates happening over how we do this, and there are different things about how to represent Perl in our standard. Some of the stuff is probably in a slide about how you do the version numbers, and do you do that embedded in the Perl itself, or do you extract the version numbers? And there's different people in the working group with different opinions, and so there's debate happening right now.
Yeah, there actually is a PR in our GitHub repo right now for adding Perl using applicability language, almost exactly like we do for CPE today.
Right.
So that is one way to do it, but we have not discussed that in detail and made any decisions. I'd love to see other thoughts and potentially PRs from others in the community.
Yeah, there's a pull request, like I said, pull requests are kind of how these ideas are floated. There's one for Perl, there's one for Omnibore. There's a third one that is basically just to create a abstracted generic representation so that, like was said about Perl can do, where you could keep adding types without having to create a new type each time, a new representation each time.
That's right. The other thing that is on the horizon, and again, we have, this actually has a feature branch, all I think for the most part ready to go. Thank you, VJ. But the stakeholder specific vulnerability classification, SSVC, that data is currently being provided by the CISA ADP, but it is using a custom metric. So essentially it's something we put into the schema, the record format, quite a while back to allow for experimental fields,
Right.
and in this case, custom metrics that we didn't anticipate. Well, we're talking about adding in official support for this, so following the specific SSV schema and the properties that are allowed, and potentially moving the data that CISA has provided previously into this.
Yeah, because the record format does allow for experimental. It's like X dash S underscore, off the top of my head, I'm going to forget. But you can add new elements, but that's not standardized. So if you're a consumer, it doesn't help you so much because it's not really a good definition of how is this data represented. It's same thing with like the tools that are used. Vulnogram started using, was it X originator or
X generator.
Generator.
Yeah.
X generator, like described the tool. So we're looking at adding like generator as a standard tag for the different tools that are out there.
Yep.
So that downstream consumers have a standardized, documented way to consume this data instead of whoever feels like throwing an X something in there. And so we're looking at adding SSVC because it is actively being used. But right now it's not standardized. And that way, if somebody else wants to use it, there would be a standardized way of doing it. And we can then add validation. Obviously, if it's an experimental tag being stuck in there by a supplier, there's no validation behind that because it's just being stuck in there randomly by a supplier. So we can start enforcing structure on that, make sure data quality again.
And in this case, this isn't even an X field. This is a custom metric,
Yeah.
which it's sort of similar, but not defined.
It's a bit of a kludge.
Yep. So this actually does dovetail into this discussion. So we haven't talked a lot about this, but this is going to, I'm sure, cause a lot of chaos on the QWG as well as in the community. There's going to be times where we're going to have to remove properties and arrays and make big changes. And we've not done this yet.
Yeah, under 5, I mean, yeah, since the 5.0 schema rolled out, 5.0 schema rolled out, we really haven't removed anything. Between 4 and 5, major change, lots of stuff changed. But I think like the number one example I can think of would be the old CVE array.
Yeah.
The CPE, I'm sorry, CPE array that's now been replaced with a better representation. We need to look at how do we deprecate that old so people stop using it if they're still using it and push them to the new one. And so that's a discussion that's kind of just started. Some people have brought it up, like we need a way, if there's something in the schema or in the record format that's no one's using or is obsoleted in some way, how do you phase that out to get people to use the new stuff, or just to remove clutter so that the record format doesn't accrete over time and end up being a giant format where only 10% of it's being used.
Yep. Yeah. And in this case, that data is pretty complex to try and figure out what to do with if we wanted to move it. Because like you were saying earlier, is it a fixed CPE? Is it an affected CPE? Is it a CPE match string of some sort?
Yeah, that would be kind of a situation where we probably have to reach out to the CNAs and say, hey, can you please migrate this over by this? We had to do this before with some things, and we go to CNAs and say, hey, here we're going to be phasing this field out. If you want this data to still be in your records, please migrate it by this date, and give them like a 6-month window or something.
That's right. And we have had some experience with that. There have been some times where we've had to make minor changes and CNAs have had to clean up some stuff,
right.
Which has gone well. I think we've gotten them to update in almost every case. But we are starting to think about, how do we notify the community when these kinds of changes are going to happen? Is 6 months sufficient? And in what way do we do that? After you submit something, Maybe we watch the logs and send you something through email later. Hey, you know what? This property is going to go away, or this array is going to get changed in this way.
Yeah, there has to probably be a phased approach, right? You
Yeah.
can't just turn it off.
Yep, that's right. So these are all things that we'd love input onto.
Do you have another mic?
Oh, I'll come to you.
Based on my experience with dealing with customers, usually a phased approach should look something more like an API versioning change. So, you know, you tell them in 6 months, we're going to have a new version endpoint, and then 6 months later, we're going to turn off the old one. So maybe more like 12 years of old data, or 12 months, sorry.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at. Probably type of thing where you start getting a warning. Hey, you're using something that's deprecated. You have, here's a clock counting down, like you got to stop, and then we turn it off at some point. And then if you try to submit at that point with something that's now off, your record gets rejected. Like if you want to submit this, you have to change. We had to do that when we went from 5.0 to 5.1. There were some things that were really broken in the 5.0 schema that were allowing bad data structure, and we turned enforcement on to stop that, which meant there were some CNAs whose tooling had to change or they could no longer submit CVEs.
That's right. We got 3 minutes left. So just to get through these quick, I mentioned that we have a GitHub repo. It is CVE-schema. So feel free to browse, take a look, add comments,
Submit things.
get involved, submit things. Yeah, we'd love it. Questions, I think we have some time for questions. I put a few things up on the screen, but if people in the room have questions, we would love to hear.
And there's nothing in this room after this, so I'm happy to hang out.
Yeah, I can as well.
Question from, trying to get to the microphone because this one's, oh, there it goes, there it goes. Okay, so there's a lot of chatter in Discord, a lot of positive feedback and some suggestions relating to Perl relating to what this gentleman pointed out. But there was one question, beyond Semver, are there any plans or interest for calendar versioning in the future?
Well, can you say it one more time? Because I'm not familiar with it.
Sure. It was when you were going over the schema a little bit earlier, and someone had asked, beyond Semver, is there any plan or interest for calendar versioning in the future?
So I haven't heard that one yet, but I will be happy to look into that. And if you want to submit a pull request or an issue for that or a discussion, that would be great. So I will put the
yeah, because we do support more. Semver is obviously not the only. There's just custom, and there's GitHub. There's all. I can't remember. Off the top of my head, I can't remember all the types.
I think we have UPC and
there's several different versioning schemes that are supported. But what we're trying to do now is add validation. So like Semver is the first one. It was somewhat widely used, and it has a defined validation system. So that's like an easy low-hanging fruit. And somebody was willing to do the work. Somebody wrote the pull request and did, and so, okay, it makes it easy for us. Somebody wrote the pull request up. But there's other things, we do want to keep adding anything that's widely supported by industry or in demand, especially if we can add validation to it. We're totally open.
Yeah, I think, no, there was, I don't know if I made it clear, but we're not stopping with Semver. So we'll add whatever makes sense. And we also want to make sure that we validate that data coming in so that it is good quality data.
For consumers.
Yep.
Yeah, and they heard what you said about, requesting for them to go in and participate and do, pull requests and such. But there are some helpful links that were added into the Discord. But we have another question over here.
Yeah, more of a comment. Before you go through the trouble and trying to add all the formats by yourself, I really encourage you to look at Verse. We using the same thing in CSAF. So we actually put quite some effort in to get useful things in there and to get versioning schemes and validation in there. So you can actually profit out of that.
That would be great.
We'll take a look.
Yeah, we definitely will take a look. This is a plug. Is this what you were talking about?
Yeah. About joining us.
The quality working group. I think our charter needs to be updated because it's
we're working on an update
yeah,
right now.
We're working on an update. I think it currently says that it's only for CNAs, but we can make exceptions. And I definitely will. With our focus on consumers, I want more participation in the QWG, and that means from consumers. So you don't have to be a CNA to join. But if you have something good to contribute, I will be happy to add you as a member. So these are our actual email addresses, not just a pointer to a site. You can go to cve.org if you want, but that is my work address, and that's
my work address.
MZ's address. So if you want to join the QWG, feel free to reach out to either of us or both.
Yeah, and it is, I mean, it's pretty easy for CNAs to join. It's basically, it's open-ended CNA. If you're not a CNA, like you're a consumer, and because we still haven't stood up that consumer feedback group, but I'm really hoping we do, we can, I believe that as chairs, there's also that ability for a chair to like an invited expert type thing where a chair can approve someone to be a member, even if you're not CNA. We do have some people in there right now, I think, aren't CNAs, or maybe they're not.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some folks that aren't CNAs for sure.
But yeah, more representing like the data science, data mining side of the world, looking for helping to improve the records because it makes their life easier.
That's right.
I have a bunch of questions related to ADPs. I don't know if you guys are the right audience for it, but
We
you're
might be.
here, so I'm going to ask. The first one is probably going to take you a while to answer. Why is it so hard to become an ADP? Because I've heard a lot of people complain about it. So hard it's gone.
Let me put my other hat on. ADP, I will agree that, how do I say this? I don't get myself in too much trouble. So this is being recorded. ADP is fairly new. I mean, we started off small. There's basically only really two ADPs right now. There's CISA, and the Secretariat technically is using an ADP functionality now. It was kind of crawl, walk, run approach of like, is this going to work? Like, because it was the first launching ADP. Is this going to break everybody? At this point, I think we've proven it's working. You know, I know that not everybody's really happy with it, but it's not breaking the world. So you can do more. We do have some others in the wings. I can't really name anybody because that'd be overstepping my bounds. But there are some others who are looking at providing other types of records or like scoring system enhancements or different things. So we've talked to some others. I am a big advocate as a CNA for CNA ADPs. Because one thing we've heard from several people at the show here too, the conversations I've had and just feedback we've gotten, one of the things that happens in the real world, like a third-party CVE gets published, open source, like OpenSSL, something gets published, CVE goes out there. I'm with F5. We use that in our products. And so, but how it affects our product isn't the same as the generic CVE. Cisco uses it, Red Hat uses it. And so we all end up publishing security advisories for this third-party CVE on our websites that our customers have to go find. But there is currently no way for us to feed that information in an effective, especially structured data format, back into that CVE record so that you have one source of truth. I want to see the ability of CNAs, like within your scope. Like for me, I wouldn't be able to publish because ADPs have a scope assigned to them. And if you overstep your bounds, you can get removed from the program. So I would want to be able to publish, how does this CVE affect an F5 product? I wouldn't talk about Dell or Cisco or anybody else, but my products. And they can do their products. So I do want to see that program expanded. I'm advocating for that internally. And so I'd like to see more of that so that more people can find useful data, not have to go find references and hunt around the internet for how does the CVE affect things other than the original generic thing.
That's right. Because we all know that for some CVE records, I will give an example that I talked to somebody about the other day, was a Linux kernel CVE. That affects tons of us. So in a lot of different ways. Yep. So it would be great for CNAs. And I think this is part of the problem too, right? It's kind of scary to think about that almost every CNA could potentially have a product that is affected in some way by the Linux kernel. So then you would have an ADP container for every single affected CNA.
Possibly,
yeah, quite possibly. So what would that look like? How would we present it? I think it just becomes a presentation problem at that point. But yes, the JSON could get rather large.
I think that almost answers my second and third question. So you're proposing that ADPs only actually be product vendors. And
No.
my second question would be, will SEA tool vendors be allowed to be ADPs and input information on products that are not their own?
I want to be clear. I'm not saying only. I want to see that right now there is no support for vendor CNA and vendor ADP, and I do want to see that, or CNA also being ADP. That's what I want to see added. But like right now, like CISA obviously is not a vendor, and they're an ADP. And some of the others that we are actively talking to who want to be ADPs, they are not vendors. Well, they are vendors in some way, but not product vendors. Like they're like tools vendors, scanning tool vendors, whatever. Allowing third parties to provide information that say contradicts the CNA, that gets very thorny and very political, because we have had CNA say, if you do that, I'm no longer a CNA. Like, if you start lying, we have people who are angry about NVD and are adamantly opposed to NVD being an ADP, which is something I'm in supporting of. I'd rather see them join the program than do their own thing, because there are people who hate what NVD does, and they issue their own score and that contradicts the vendor. And I, as a vendor, I get that. I hate when they contradict us because they're usually wrong. I'll say that point blank. I disagree strongly with most of their scores. So if you allow them to start coming into the record, I'm still in favor of making them an ADP, but it definitely is a very hot button topic.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Just while we're talking quality, so one of the things I'm hearing, and I've been hearing it all week, is the going to and being able to publish data for consumption via APIs and via the programs. Something that, when it comes to CVEs, is kind of important is are the narrative fields. And when you talk about, one of the things I've noted is there's some vendors that basically, when a CVE is published, there's almost nothing in the narrative fields. There's just pointers to their website.
Yep.
Is there anyone from Microsoft in the room, by the way? And then you go to you follow the link to the website, and essentially there's just their position on that particular vulnerability, which isn't always tremendously useful. So you're not doing away with narratives, I hope. Is there a future?
The description field?
Right.
Yeah.
Or even other narrative. I mean, narrative fields in terms of human reading of CVE data is kind of important. And actually, as we go forward through the development of APIs, being able to pull those narrative fields and have that text that goes actually and is usable by consuming programs, still very, very valuable. But it's something that, again, some vendors just leave it blank. So.
Yeah. And I think that the only way we fix that, and this goes back to Andrew's talk, was we have to, if there's a need, we have to raise the minimum requirements. So that I think the only way that gets done is if we start identifying specifically what those pieces of data are that consumers have to have, and then we have to start having that conversation about how we get that done and start requiring. There's a question.
I'm glad that you brought up what you just brought up. So we are the content team in Cisco PSIRT. So we edit, publish, and maintain the security advisories. And we put a lot of effort into our summaries and our descriptions. So I was going to actually ask about the importance of the words in addition to the data. And do you see a big variance in what submitters give you?
Oh, yeah.
And is there, do you have people who are like, here's one sentence, this is a DOS? Or then you have, like, we give you like a 2-paragraph description of it, and is somewhere in the middle where we want to be, or should everybody be providing a lot more words, or
pretty much you can provide, because it's the format actually supports multiple. You have the description, there's like the mitigation section, you can do lots of sections. We have some CNAs who basically reproduce their entire advisory in the CVE, which is fine. You have others who basically will have like read our advisory, like just nothing more. Right now, I think what is the description validation? It has to be like 5 characters to 124 or something, 1024 or something like that.
I think it only has to be a single character, if I remember.
Yeah,
right.
it's not very, so like it just has to be a description. And it's hard to validate that, right? Because it's human readable text. Like you could just put in lorem ipsum over and over again, and it would satisfy a length check. So how do you validate that? Obviously we're not going to have humans in the loop validating every CVE. So other than feedback and peer pressure, I know like F5 as a CNA, we copy our what our description field that's in our security advisory, we have a description that is copied verbatim into our CVE. So that's what we provide as far as CVE goes. We provide that description block. It's different CNAs will have different approaches. And I don't think there's ever going to be one thing that satisfies everybody. There are some arguments, people like, I want to see everything, including the version numbers and the product names and everything in the description. We generally don't do that as a CNA because that you end up, especially with multiple products, multiple versions, you end up with a very long rambling description that just talks about version numbers and product names. So there's nothing one approach of things to make everybody happy, but I think more details at some degree is better. Yeah.
Quick question regarding ADPs. Will you stop publishing security advisories when you're an ADP, or do you expect that as an outcome?
Someone's an ADP. What do you mean about being an ADP?
So if somebody is an ADP, do you expect that then they stop publishing security advisories, or would that be?
Oh, no, we would never do that. If CFI became ADP, we would still publish it on our site. Because that's like we're a CNA, but we still publish security advisories even though we publish a CVE.
So think of if we could start things all over with CVE and NVD. NVD enriches records, right? They don't create new advisories. So there are going to be roles, I think, as an ADP, and that was envisioned originally, that some ADPs will just provide enriched data for records that already exist, not publishing their own. Does that make sense? So we wouldn't expect an ADP to have their own security advisories.
Well, it depends on the type of ADP, I guess. Like if you're talking about a CNA who's also an ADP or a vendor ADP,
yeah,
they're probably going to keep publishing. I don't know of a single CNA who doesn't publish security advisories without, just because you publish a CVE record doesn't mean you don't put it on your own website.
Yeah, so my question is actually a follow-up to this. Are there conversations about including CNA's VEX documents as part of the CVE record?
Way far off topic from I just know that like it's break time and everything. And if you guys want to continue to discuss that.
Yeah, we'll take one more question.
After,
Can you ask it again?
Are there conversations about including CNA's VEX documents as part of the CVE record?
So I don't think we've had conversations about including VEX data, but there is, I think, a way to get some of that product information, and maybe that could be consumed by CVE records.
I have not yet heard anybody talking about any combination of CVE records and VEX.
Yeah.
Any merging there. I mean, CVEs are often referenced in VEX documents, but it tends to be that direction where VEX might say this product is affected by this CVE. Here's a link to a CVE record. But I mean, you could add it as a reference, I suppose, because you could have a reference field if you're like a CNA or if some ADPs, you could add a reference link. So this is a reference for information. I suppose you could link to a VEX document too.
Yeah. I think I did have a conversation with somebody about the fact that there'll be more product information, potentially affected products in the VEX, which could, if we could find a way to suck that back into the CVE record, that might be very useful. Okay, one more.
Take it off line to Discord.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. I have even more questions about ADPs. This is a big topic for me. So as a follow-up to my last question about allowing others to become ADPs, will ADP records then need to be validated by the original CNA or perhaps even other ADPs, or?
There was never intention to have validation. So the CNA owns the original record, but the ADPs are adding additional information. Now, could we have some sort of maturity level rating system?
That's been discussed.
Maybe, yeah.
But like some kind of feedback. But yeah, because the way it's set up with the different containers in the record, it's like you're responsible for your container. And so if you're an ADP, you're given a scope. If you exceed your scope, you get talked to, and if you keep doing it, you get removed. And so if you're approved to do something, you're approved to do that. And like the CNA can't say, hey, I don't like this person. Like, I don't like CISA adding wrong enrichment stuff to my record. You don't get a voice. You absolutely do not, as a CNA, have a voice in that. It is part of the program. They are an ADP. If you don't like what they're doing, you can put something in your part of the record that disagrees with them, but you can't stop them.
Interesting.
And same thing for one ADP can't stop another ADP. That is just the way the program is set up, and I don't see that changing.
And one last thing, will the 5.1 standard be able to be extended to old records so ADPs could go back and slowly correct old records?
Well, everything, the ADP was introduced in the 5.0.
Okay.
Was
5.1.0? Was it? No, it was before that. I'm sorry. It was like 5.0.
I think ADP has been there since we went to 5. It just started getting used when 5.1 came out. all 4.0 records have been migrated to 5. So technically it should be anything that exists in this corpus right now has a 5 version. So I think any ADP, like if CISO wanted to go back and enhance all existing CVEs, they could. I don't think they're going to, but I think they could.
Yeah, I just wonder as more ADPs come online and they have a vested interest in correcting the records, they might
Right.
start going back and fixing everything up.
Yeah, and there are plenty of CVEs out there that are, say, from dead vendors or dead
Yeah.
projects or just dead products that maybe there's new information that came out, that, so the record was published in 2006 or something, and an ADP might be able to update that record to show how it's affecting things today.
Thank you.
Give a hand to Chris and Megazone for the presentation.